out verbally, often venting frustration by exposing others' faults or spreading damaging stories. The wicked, evil men. So the wicked use deceitful, divisive, and harmful speech. Their words set traps that destroy relationships. And you're unjust and dishonest. Dishonest people twist facts or misrepresent others. Gossip often includes exaggeration or distortion, forms of injustice. If you look at all those different things, you think of, when we get over to the point of talking about Saul and David, and you look back at all those and how gossip plays into that, what happened in that story? He's on the run for his life for things that weren't perceived in Saul's, of course, now kind of demented mind, with the evil spirit with him. But the evil spirit doesn't tell him, and we'll talk about it, does not tell him to go after David. But there's a lot of things that exaggerates things, but people just fuel the fire. So there's a catchy tune the book talks about. We talk about it all the time, Vacation Bible School. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little mouth, what you say. Yeah, Ricky?
About how gossip and stuff's carrying on. I know you heard of this before, but when I was younger, the first phone we had was a phone that had a party line on it, and my mom picked the receiver up. She was going to make a phone call, and two ladies was getting at it. Well, Lucille, did you hear what Mary did, or what she's going to do to Lucy or something? Just back and forth. And Mama was nice. She said, "I'm sorry about that." Said, "I need to make a phone call, please." They just kept rambling on.
I lived in a house that had a party line. Yeah, and you'd pick up the phone, somebody be on the other end. I get crazy Andy Griffith here, but there's an episode where this businessman comes through Mayberry, and his car breaks down, and it's on a Sunday. And there's two widow women that get on the phone, and they just know they're going to be on the phone. They talk all day long, and they are spreading a little gossip back and forth. He picks up the phone, and he's listening to them. Talk about somebody and their legs or whatever's going on. I forget what they talk about, but they're talking, just back and forth. And it's interesting to see, even in different other shows and different other movies. Anybody ever watch Edward Scissorhands? I watched that for the first time here a couple weeks ago. If you watch it, you're going to see a huge thing that has to do with gossip. This, when Edward Scissorhands is found and the lady finds him, she brings him home. Somebody sees Edward Scissorhands in the car with her, and she immediately goes in the house and gets on the phone and starts hitting the phone tree. And then they all meet on the corner to all talk about it together. And that happens multiple times during that movie. But a catchy tune. So, and we talked about this last week. Kids repeat things that they hear. That's what they're learning to say. They're learning to talk. They're like, Polly the parrot. They just want to repeat things that have been put into their brains, things they want, they hear and say. And they mimic the things that we do. And you wonder sometimes when a kid comes up and says something, well, where did you hear that? And then you have to think about it for yourself. Did I say that? Or did they hear it outside of the house? Preschool or another adult somewhere, or one of their siblings brings it home from wherever they heard it. It may be at school. But you ask them, where did you hear that? So we impress upon little minds. We impress upon other people as well. So children are not the only ones. The things that we do ourselves as adults, the movies we watch, we just talked about some of that. The music that we listen to, shapes our lives. I've had the middle school class before and talking about things that they listen to and the music that they love to listen to. And I challenged them to bring me 10 songs that they love to listen to, and whether it had, they had to bring me 10 songs that they listened to that didn't have anything to do with something unscriptural, whether it be languages in it, innuendos that were spoken of. You know, it's got a great snappy tune. Do you love to listen to it? But they catch you with what's in it. You know, we listen to those things. The media that's out there, and talking about profanity. Go back to the movies. How sometimes are we desensitized by the amount of language that's put out there? And since it's out there so much, it's so prevalent, watch a movie, don't care what people say. I don't speak that way, it's all right. Gone with the Wind. When Rhett Butler gets up there and says, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give," that was bad for its time. That was provocative in its time. Now you can say whatever you want. You can put whatever you want to say in any kind of movie, whatever it's out there, and it's just there to hear. And then politics, shapes our lives every day. You can't turn on anything. You can't get on social media. You can't get on the TV. I don't even watch the news. People come up to me about something that's been said. I don't know. I didn't see it. I said, don't you care what's happening in the world? Can I control it? I can't control it. People are going to do what they're going to do. As long as it doesn't affect me and my four walls of my house, sometimes I just don't care to hear it. So I don't care to talk about it. So James 1:19 tells us quick to hear, slow to speak. So you have 2 ears to listen and 1 mouth to speak because you are to listen twice as much as you talk. We're talking about and listening about listening. Think about this in a completely reversed way. Where gossip is concerned, you would benefit from letting it go in one ear and out the other. Listening, we're talking about, even at workplaces and people's concerns, and they want to come to you and talk to you about things. I have nurses go in and we'll talk to somebody. Well, a patient's got a complaint. They got a problem. They don't listen long enough to finally get down to what that one problem is. A lot of times what they're complaining about in the beginning is not exactly what they're actually needing to be taken care of. You get to the root of the problem and take care of that, and then the rest of it goes away. But they want to fix it before they actually, hear it all. Think about it here, too. Listen to somebody's gossip and you want to immediately start chiming in, maybe you just need to shut it down. Because the longer you listen, the more information you get and the more stuff you got to put in your brain you got to forget about and not say at all. So just let it go in one ear and out the other. When I say discernment is the key. Are they giving you information that is credible? Something that is something to build up? Or are they giving you information just for the sake of, did you know? Did you hear? Those kinds of things. So if you look in, of course, in our books here, relay a verse here. Proverbs 26 and verse 20. It says, "For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, contention quiets down." This triangle of fire thing, we use this in the operating room. Every case we do, we assess fire threat in the OR. Believe it or not, in your operating room, there's more threat of a fire in the operating room and doing surgery than there is in any other place in the hospital. Why? Because we have an ignition source. We have what's called a bovie. It puts out electric energy. It makes a spark. We've got scopes in there that have hot lights at the end of them and have heat. We have lasers that can produce fire and it produce heat. So you got an ignition source. Then we got fuel. The clothing or these things we put out on people, the prep that we use is alcohol based. it's put on people, it can catch on fire if it's not dry with the fumes. It's just like gasoline. You throw a match at the fumes, it's going to explode. And then the next thing that goes along with it, guess what we give everybody in the operating room while they're asleep? Oxygen. It's pure oxygen, and it will burn. I've got a video work that shows where an endotracheal tube penetrated with a bovie catches on fire, and it's like a blowtorch. Every breath it gives, it throws flames out the end of it. So you think about that in the sense of what we're doing with gossip. Gossip is the igniter. Whether it be the person you talk about the gossip or just the message themselves with that, that's the ignition source. That's what's going to start the fire. The next one's the listener. That first listener, first group of people, whatever it is, the first group. This is the one that fans the flames. It gets to the second one. And now we're just started a fire. All right? Flames are getting higher. Flames are going back around to the one they just started with to get them even more. It goes around to the next one to get it even hotter. What if it stopped right there? It never got past the first person. The first person that leaned upon their ear to talk about never went to the next person to talk about it even further. It just stops right there. Smoking ending, shuts it out. Vaporizes, goes away. If you do not give people an avenue to talk and do not take it any further, it doesn't go any further. So these come from the questions that are in the back of this chapter. And one of them says, why is gossip so enjoyable to listen to? When I look at this list, has anybody got an idea for you? Why is this so enjoyable? Why would you think it's enjoyable to listen to? Anybody got an idea? What sits on your mind? Yep.
Your own issues, being one, and of course entertainment.
Yeah.
You know, just those two right there alone. You know, a lot of times can capture a lot of attention. In a person.
I keep relying or laying back to work environments, but you can't help but sit around lunchtime. Although sometimes it's the only time all the managers we get together as a group of managers, and me and an administrative side of that with the educator role. We all eat together. Sometimes it winds up being business as usual and talk about things that had to do with the surgery. But then it turns into, a lot of times, talking about something else. Talking about one person and what's going on with somebody. Talking about somebody in the higher up, in the management role, higher than us. Why. It does. It talks about that. Right? It's just something to fill a space a lot of times. But it said, like this, it makes people feel in the know. We've talked about that. Feeds curiosity. And so people naturally want to know what's happening to others' lives, especially dramatic or private details. So it provides a sense of superiority. Hearing about someone else's flaws can make our own struggles seem much smaller. See, it creates a false sense of connection. Shared gossip can bond people, though in an unhealthy way. Distracts from your own issues. If you can deflect something off yourself and bring somebody else to somebody's attention, draw it away from you, that's what that's about. We're talking about it's just entertainment. We can't help ourselves. You know, how many times you heard something kind of juicy about somebody and you actually laughed about it? You know, it entertains us, takes up a void, and takes up a space. It gives us a sense of power or control, knowing something others don't or can't or don't can feel empowering. It validates hidden emotions. Gossip often confirms prejudices, frustrations, or suspicions somebody already holds. And it provides an outlet for bitterness or resentment. So, why is gossip enjoyable to listen to? And I said, out for business, it appeals to the flesh. It feels safe. When you're in a closed group with one another and you're talking about something that, for yourself, maybe feels safe to you. But talking about someone else, it keeps the attention, again, away from yourself. Appears harmless at first. Sense of moral comparison. So gossip allows people to measure themselves against others, often favorably. Creates a shared villain. People bond through a common target. If you both got somebody that you both disagree with or both want to talk about, now you got to bond with somebody else over that same person. Instead, it taps into your boredom. We're talking about that idleness and talking about, the entertainment value of it, taps into boredom. Other question about that, so what are helpful ways to combat listening to gossip? Well, set personal boundaries. Say to yourself, I'm not going to listen. Is it, if it's not helpful, true, or mine to deal with, I won't engage. Refusing to respond with interest. If you're leaning in to tell somebody, really, or what happened, you give them another way to start talking again and start filling in the gaps that you don't know, then you're showing interest. Just don't show interest. Changing the subject. How's the weather today? Whatever it is. Just walk away from it. Speaking of the target. I think it's a little bit more of that. But, speaking about the target, avoid people, environments, wherever that may be, wherever that common, wherever the breeding ground for gossip, wherever people are standing around talking about things. Maybe just walking away from it. And quoting or recalling Scripture. If you got something in your mind that comes up that you know of that tells us not to speak of, gossip, quote Scripture about it. Probably going to get a look that you never had gotten before. And so what are some helpful ways to combat it? So remembering how it felt. Did somebody ever gossip about you? And you knew they were talking bad about you. Remembering how that felt. Why are you telling this to me? Why are you telling me this? Answering that question. Reframing the situation or keeping confidentiality commitments. Setting rules. Wouldn't say, don't listen. If you wouldn't say it about somebody, then don't listen to it when it's being said about somebody else. Praying for the target. Whoever it is that they're after, something's going on in their life that somebody finds juicy and informational and wants to talk about. So, praying for them. And a reminder, gossip is not entertainment. And how can I keep from being drawn in? Recognizing, negative conversation earlier. People start talking about something, start filling the information, and you're like, wait a minute. This is not going down a road that, is great for this person, not great for me either. Trying to recognize that sooner. Maybe even knowing the person that's coming to you, because it says they're knowing the person. Knowing that that's what they're after, knowing that's what they want to say. Again, changing the subject, refusing the bait. Somebody dangles that in front of you, just don't bite. Recognizing the speaker's pattern. That relates to the first one. Checking your emotions. If that excites you and that's something you want to go after, makes you happy, makes you feel good, well, maybe you need to look into what's going on with your own emotions and things. Assume the best instead of the worst. Something has happened in this person's life, and you want to know that it's something good there. So assume the best and don't assume the worst. The reminder at the end that gossip spreads harm and not truth. And for yourself, pray for wisdom in yourself. Don't pray for that target, but pray for yourself. So moving into the Saul and David, troubling spirit, and 1 Samuel 16:14 says, "Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him." So that stage is set. He doesn't have a clear mind about things even now going forward, which makes it even worse. But do you have to have an evil spirit plaguing your mind in order for you to think the worst about somebody? Or to speak about somebody else? Or to listen to and believe, false truths, slanders, gossips that are pertaining to you? I'd say not. This is a very unique situation. But God had left him. Saul had done things that, was putting all the, everything on himself. Everything is done, the victories I've won, and everything's happened. It's about me. And it wasn't about God. So you know why God left him. But this troubling spirit is there. So it agitated Saul. It distorted Saul's perception, magnified his fear and jealousy. And, of course, it destabilized Saul's already insecure mind. But if you look there, I've got you another little handout that has to do with all the things that were said and all the perceptions that Saul was looking at. First off came from the women's song, when they were singing and talking about David and his 10,000s and Saul and his 1,000s. There's been some explanations of that. Of course, they was talking about in the Hebrew writing and such, like, they were honoring Saul, even though he saw it as a slight. I don't know if they turned it around and said, David his thousands and Saul his 10,000s. Maybe it would have been better for him. But that's what they said. They sang about that, the 10,000, 1,000. Saul, he looks at it as being slight, although they are just singing about the two of them and their victories. So David is greater than Saul. He'll take, of course, the next step is, he promised, whoever killed Goliath, whoever helped him there would, one, not have any taxes, I think it was. What are the other things? I'm trying to think of all the things. There's multiple things he gave him. One was that he wouldn't pay taxes for the rest of his life. He'd be set up very well, and he was, and I think part of it had to be a marriage. But he was going to set up all this stuff. Now he's like, well, he's got all that. Now he'll take the kingdom from me. Like I said, the women were celebrating victory. They could never claim David intended to be king. So Saul's popularity, the next one was, Saul's popularity in 18 and 16 said, everyone is turning against Saul and following David. Well, David was simply, successful in battle and loyal to Saul. Popularity, as I said, is not rebellion. Jonathan's loyalty, Jonathan is choosing David over you to take the throne. Jonathan defending David because David was innocent, not because he opposed Saul. Michael's affection for him. Saul's own daughter was showing affection for him. And David is using that word. The rumor or the assumption is that David is using Saul's daughter to gain power. Michael loved David genuinely. David had not plotted anything. God favored David. Then David's military success. Again, David is winning victories to overthrow. The assumption is David is winning victories to overthrow Saul. Well, David is just fighting Saul's battles for him and then faithfully serving Israel. That's all he's doing. David at Nob. This is one thing that was left out of this lesson, And I don't know why this wasn't brought up. Where David is on the run and he goes to the priest and he is asking for provisions. He's hungry. He needs something to eat. And he doesn't have, he took off and he didn't take anything with him. He didn't have a weapon. Didn't have anything to defend himself. You know, the priest gives him the showbread that he has there. He also gives him Goliath's spear and Goliath's sword. I'm hoping that David had grown some by then, because as a boy, we talk about the size of that thing. That'd be that's a crazy weapon. But he gives them the weapons that he has. And he gives them what was taken from Goliath. Well, Doeg, as you know, he was there. It says he was restrained by the temple, but if you look at commentaries and think about it, he wasn't like he was captive. He wasn't just like held there. He was there taking care of business he had to do at the temple. But he overheard all of it, saw all of it. And he was one of Saul's head herdsmen. You know, so he's got a prominent place for Saul. So you kind of think of his motivation. I'm going to make myself even higher in Saul's eyes. I'm going to, improve my station in Saul's eyes. And then whenever Saul comes through and he finds out about these things, and Doeg tells him, well, in a treasonous way, he gave David the food, he gave him the showbread, he also gave him the weapons. He is contributing to David's treason against you. That was a pretty big one for me. That wasn't in there. This right there, because it caused Saul to wind up killing, or having killed, and Doeg did it for him, killed all the priests, killed their wives, killed their children, and their animals. Pretty significant when it comes to that. And it was a lie. You know, it wasn't anything. It was a false truth. So going further on, David fleeing. After he flees, David is hiding because he is plotting to kill Saul. The assumption is that he's going out there hiding and wait for Saul to just come around. We know, and get to them in a minute, two different ways that he did not do that and refuted it. But so David hid because Saul was, unjustly trying to kill him. He repeatedly refused to harm Saul. And then David's refusal to kill. David is hiding or biding his time, waiting for the right moment to assassinate Saul. That was the assumption. But David twice spared Saul's life to prove he was not Saul's enemy. And then Saul's interpretation of everything, everyone is against me. David is, conspiring with my family and the priest, everybody around. But it says Saul was influenced by fear, insecurity, and false reports. David had no conspiracy against him. In the final outcome, he was seeing David as, a traitor and that he must die. So, David is a traitor. He's going to have to die. But God has chosen David. And David never lifted a finger, say, against Saul. The threat existed only in Saul's mind. So figure this, and come from the questions. We're fixing to get close to the end of this. Why are we more willing to listen to gossip and slander about someone we already have negative emotions toward? Why are we willing to do that? Validate your feelings about them. So, we talked about not liking somebody. What is it that you typically think about not liking somebody? How's that? You're talking about validating your feelings towards someone. Are we just trying to strengthen our own emotion towards someone, or actually, proving that it, or proving to somebody else, or trying to make them believe that it's true. That what you dislike, they should dislike too. You know, I may not like something about you, but I should convince somebody else that you should dislike the same thing. Yeah, I can see that in you. Yeah, I don't like that either. What's something else? Anybody got an idea? What it is that makes it, you know, you more willing to gossip about somebody that you have negative feelings for. Let's look at a few. Here, just going through, David confronts Saul on two different occasions. He tells him, you know, says, and David said to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men who say, behold, David seeks your harm? And he said, why does my Lord pursue after his servant? What have I done? What evil is on my hands? He said, now, for let my Lord be king, or let Lord the king hear the words of his servant. It is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, or if it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. You know, he goes personally to Saul 2 different times to ask him, why? Why are you doing this to me? And we've talked about it before. If you've got somebody that is sinning against you, go to that person. You know, if something is being said about you, rather than you disliking them and telling somebody else why you dislike them or why you got to know about it, why not go to them and figure out what it is and why they started spreading it in the first place? Yeah, they are. They are. And if you think about that triangle of fire, if you can put out any one of them, you know, think about it in that operating room setting, when we're talking about the ignition source and the fuel and the oxidizer. You know, the thing that's going to spark it, the person that's going to catch on fire with it,